What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Start, Build, Grow Show. We are doing a very special episode today because I'm here solo and we are starting a new series. So I'm going to dive into my entire journey from starting my roofing company all the way to building a company that does multiple millions of dollars, well over 8 figures each and every year. So stay tuned for episode number 1. We're going to talk about getting started. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Start, Build, Grow Show. I'm riding solo today, and one of the things that I've learned and that I'm passionate about. If you watch the show, I do this because I love helping young entrepreneurs. I love helping, people succeed. And my space is roofing. That's where I've found the most success as an entrepreneur. And I love sharing my story. I love helping others start, build, and grow roofing companies. We wrote the book called Start It, Build It, Grow It, The Contractor's Guide to Success. If you haven't got a copy of that yet, make sure you grab that. I'll show you that right here. So make sure you get a copy of that. If you haven't, you can find it on Amazon, or you can reach out to me. We have some digital copies available for you as well. Wrote the book. I just wanted to kind of give a guide and share, how to build a successful roofing company, a successful construction company, trades company. And then from there, we built an online platform, which now has over 200 hours of content, everything from starting to building all the different systems and processes, production departments, sales teams, sales leadership programs, how to onboard, how to hire, how to train all your staff, and pretty much every document you can imagine. And we have a whole team of coaching. Myself, I do coaching as well as we have a team of other coaches. And that's what's evolved from this passion of just trying to help, provide resources to help contractors be successful. And it all started on my own journey. It all started, I had an original dream of being, in the construction space. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I knew I fell in love with construction. I've always loved construction. I love the idea of building something from the ground up and seeing the results of that. So my original dream was not roofing. It was to be a home builder. Okay. I wanted to be a home builder. And I was very specific about that. And I took a job during college. I took a job. I was able to actually, it's an interesting story. I might as well share this piece of it too. I decided that I wanted to be a construction or be a home builder. I want to learn how to build a home from the ground up, and had a friend of mine who happened to get an internship with a construction company in the town I was going to college in, which is, in northern Colorado. And, I begged her and bugged her for a few months just to get me an interview. And I said, just get me in the room with the owner of that company. Cause I knew obviously they're hiring interns. I was like, I want to be an intern. I want to learn how to build a house. So somehow, some way, she finally reached out to her boss and got me an interview. And I walked into that office, met this guy, never had met him before. To this day, we're still friends, and he was a mentor of mine. But that I sat down in the interview. Here I am. I'm 19 at this point. I think I'm probably about 20-year-old kid, in college, my sophomore year, maybe my junior year, 2-3 years into college, going to school. And I wanted to be a builder. And I sat down there and I told him my vision. I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn how to build a home from the ground up. I wanted to learn construction management, and I wanted to be a home builder someday. And at the time, he was a home builder. He was a custom home builder, and they did some tract homes, some custom homes. And I sat there, connected with him. And I think that interview lasted 2.5 to 3 hours. We were there for a minute, and I connected with him, and I left out of there on cloud nine. I was like, man, that was great. This is it. This is my journey. I'm on my way. And crickets. I didn't hear back from him. I didn't get a commitment while I was in that room. And basically, when I left out of there, he had told me that, they don't really need anybody right now. They got a couple projects going on, but they don't necessarily need a project manager. His partner was handling most of that at the time. And, but I still left out of it with some optimism. But like a week goes by, a few days, at least up to a week goes by. And lo and behold, the phone rings, and this guy's name is Steve. And on the other line, there it was. He called me back and he's like, "Hey man, I don't necessarily need a project supervisor or a project manager, especially with no experience right now. However," he said, "he's building his own house, right? Building his own custom home. And he could use an assistant. He can use somebody just to kind of help and learn." And at that point, he offered me an internship. Before I even knew if and when there was any money involved, I just said, "Yep, I'm in. When do I show up? When do I start?" So that was my start in, into the construction space. And I share that because the theme of this show today is getting started. And some of the takeaways from that: tenacity. Okay. One of the things that I've learned as I look back on my own career, and I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to get there, but I knew what I wanted to do. I had a vision, and I knew I wanted to be a home builder. And I was very tenacious, multiple phone calls, multiple, questions. And I asked and I pressed and I did whatever I could to get myself into that room, or into the arena, so to speak. Just give me a chance. And I had to work my way through that. So that's tenacity. I've learned that, and I've developed that. I've streamlined that over the years. But if there's a young entrepreneur listening to this right now, you've got to be tenacious. You've got to understand what you want, and you got to be willing to do whatever it takes to go get it. It's not just going to come to you. It's not just going to happen by accident. You got to want it, and you got to go get it. So that was early on in my career. I was able to do that. And I pretty much worked for pennies on the dollar. I think I'm making a few $100 a week, making next to nothing. I had 2 other jobs. Talking about tenacity, I worked 3 jobs while going to college full time to try to accelerate my career. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to be in construction, but I also had bills to pay. I was paying my own way through college. So I waited tables, a couple different restaurants, and worked at this construction company for a while, and made hardly any money. But I adjusted my schedule again. I wanted to make it happen. So it was sun up to sundown. I was either working or studying in school. And that's just what it took. At that point, I just felt like, I'm not the smartest kid. I wasn't great at school by any means. I just knew, that one thing I did have was tenacity. I knew that if I, worked hard and I can outwork others, then I could put myself in position to succeed. And lo and behold, it took a while, but that happened. All right, let's fast forward. I did that a couple years, 2.5 years. I was working. By the time I graduated school in 2006, I had worked from just an intern supervisor of one, as a part-time, assistant superintendent, assistant project manager. I worked my way up with that company to where I had done over a dozen ground up builds. Some of them were literally staking the ground before we actually dug the foundations from the ground up. And a few I had taken over at different parts of the build and project manager. So I had a lot of experience at an early age. I mean, I was there for 2.5 years. I knew I was building homes before I can even drink, and learned a ton. I learned so much about construction, all the inner workings of what it took to build a home. And I was well on my way to my dream, right? My career. And through that process, networking, I started connecting with some of our subcontractors, and as a project manager, it's really important, especially as a really young project manager, right? I was some 20-year-old kid telling, experienced subcontractors what to do and how to do it, and trying to hold them accountable to their budgets and being on time and trying to coordinate stuff. So I had to establish myself early, and that was tricky. It was tricky. And I think a lot of people in our space can relate to that, because, a lot of us get in this business real young, and we have to overcome some obstacles of being the young guy trying to tell some of the older crowds or more experienced people what to do. And that was tricky. And I had to navigate that. I had to learn that. And how I succeeded was being real, being myself, being confident, learning, and also knowing what I didn't know, and being able to admit, like, hey, I'm not sure about that, but I'll figure it out, and I'll find out. And I sure enough went and figured it out and found out. And I wasn't arrogant about it. I wasn't trying to prove or show people that I knew what I didn't know, and just being real and genuine and building relationships. So that was key. That was a takeaway there. Built relationships and started that process early on in my career. And lo and behold, I come to a crossroads. I come to a place where I was just about to graduate college. I had gotten a little bit of a raise. I was making a couple bucks more, but not enough to live, not enough to survive, not enough to live, not enough to graduate and have real bills and pay for my life, right? So, I sat down with the owners of that company and just tried to figure out like what my future was there. And they were like, we love you. We want you, we want you to be around. But the problem was they had just bought a bunch of land. They were kind of in between projects. And they're like, we don't really have any big projects for about 6 months because there's some development that needed to take place. And we can't really give you a raise. And we can't pay you really what you would deserve at this point in time. So I'm not sure what to do. So I took that, I thought about it and trying to figure out what my next steps were. And one of my subcontractors that I had built a relationship with, he owned a paint and drywall company. So he was the guy that did all my paint and drywall and all my projects. He and I built a relationship together. And after talking to him and coordinating, and eventually, we sat down probably at lunch and we're just talking, shooting the shit. That's kind of what we did. Every once in a while, we'd connect every couple of days or so, being that we work together so closely. I got with him and he was like, why don't you, I get calls all the time of people wanting to do basement finish. And he's like, I just do the drywall and the paint portion of it. Why don't you do the whole GC? Why don't you do it all? Like figure that out and do that. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, okay, this may be my opportunity. Let me think about this for a minute. And I had built another relationship with my framer, and he did trim carpentry and framing and those sort of things. And I made a couple calls to him. He's like, yeah, man, I'm in, let's do this. And lo and behold, that first gentleman that did the drywall, he got me, he had the next person that called him that said, hey, I want to finish my basement. Can you do that? He was like, hey, I got a guy, let me connect you, and connected me with that person. And I went down and measured and pretty much pretended I knew what I was doing. And I knew enough, but I had never done a basement finish on my own. I had done some remodels and done some basements because we did a lot of basement finish within the construction company I worked for, but I hadn't done it on my own before. I went in there and somehow, some way I was able to, design the basement and build out the material list and connect all the subs and get all the bids I needed to create an estimate for them. And lo and behold, I don't know, they took a risk and they signed a contract. They hired me to do their basement. And ultimately that's what launched my first company, my first construction company. The company wasn't even registered. At that point, I basically sold the job before I had a license, and I was in process, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But before I had everything registered and all the things in place to run my business, I just was hustling. I went there like, let me see if I can do this. And I tested it and sold a deal. So I'm like, oh crap, now I got to scramble. Now I got to actually put some logistics around this and build a business. And contracting, I needed a license. I needed my own license. So what I did, I looked around, went online and called around, and I found there was a local community college nearby. And I'm, fresh out of college, I'm used to the college thing. And I figured out that they had a 6-week course, and it was, I think, 1 or 2 nights a week. And it was a course specifically for getting you as a prep course for getting your general contractor's license. So I figured, okay, I'll spend the next 6 weeks working on that. And actually was working on this simultaneously before I landed that contract. So that's why I talk about that, because right when I decided that I want to go on my own, I did do this research and I did start that process, but I hadn't completed that process by the time I got my first contract. Right. So I had to, kind of finagle some things timing worked out, but I had to get my license first. So I went through that class and, finally was able to get done with that. And it was like a prep course, and went and took my license. I got my license as a general contractor, International Code Council, International Building Code. And this was probably back in 2006, maybe at this point, or 2005. I don't know what code book it was, but it was a while ago, about 20 years ago now. And got my license, started my first job, and went after it, man. I just did what I knew to do, knew how to, do construction management. And that's what I knew. But what I didn't know was running a business. I went to business school. I went to school for marketing, for business. I took all the business classes, but there's a difference between, looking at books, listening to teachers and doing projects, and going into the real world and learning invoicing and learning billing and learning how to manage money and manage cash flow and all those sort of things. So I didn't really know exactly what I was doing there. I just knew how to put a good product out and knew how to, hustle and build stuff. So I went in and started managing the job and did my best with what I knew to try to manage the cash flow. I would take deposits took deposits from the clients and just tried to manage whatever I could to pay those out and deposits to the subcontractors and managed to kind of scrape by. It took about 8 weeks to do the project. I originally budgeted, I think 4 to 6 weeks for it. It took a lot longer. It wasn't a huge basement. But I got my feet wet and I learned a lot. And at the end of the day, I don't think I made any money, maybe like $1,000 and didn't pay myself anything, but I learned a lot. And through that, kept networking, right? My buddies, people knew that I was doing this now, and there was demand, right? That's important when you're starting a business. You want to start something that you understand the market behind it. Is there a market for this? Is there a demand? Do people want the product? Do people want the service that I'm providing? And at that point in time, it was popular. There was a lot of people who had just bought in houses over the last couple of years, and they bought them without basements and they wanted to finish their basement. So I was like, you know what? There's a nice niche. I can position myself doing basement finish. So proceeded to do that for a couple of years, got some, built some good networks, got connected with some investors and started doing some really nice custom work where I'm doing really cool custom cabinetry, custom floors, custom theaters. We did some custom theater rooms and just some really cool stuff, and started to make a name for myself as this custom home builder. That was my dream. I was well on my way to my dream. And I kept trying to figure things out, right? On the business side, I just, every Friday I would go around and write checks to whoever I could, my subcontractors, and pay them as much as I could based on what I had in the account. And by this point I was smart, and I was like, I'm going to get QuickBooks because I need a bookkeeping. And someone told me that along the way, and I probably heard it in school. So I got that, and I was writing my checks through there, and I was trying to connect the bank accounts and balance things out. But I still really didn't know what I was doing. Hadn't really took any training there. I was just, I'm a math guy. I knew math. I'm like, okay, if I have X amount of dollars as a budget and I can spread that out and pay my bills, and hopefully there'll be some left over at the end. I wasn't really job costing. I was just, taking total cash versus total payables and trying to do the best I could to manage that. But what happened was I got to a point where I was doing a couple jobs, 2 or 3 jobs at a time. A lot of my time was taken up managing jobs, and I would put the tool bags on still, right? I was out there doing the framing myself, doing trim work, helping paint, helping drywall, installing doorknobs, doing all the things, as many things as I could do myself, so I didn't have to incur those costs to try to create a little margin for the business or for what I was doing. But the problem was, when I'm spending all the time doing all the work, I wasn't marketing. I wasn't selling. I wasn't able to market the company. Okay, so then I would finish a project and I would shift towards marketing and sales. Okay, I got to go sell more deals. I got to, put a marketing plan together, order some yard signs, and maybe try to run some ads and do something to get more business. So then I would spend some time there, and then I'd get a deal. Okay, then I'm back into helping produce a deal. But there was this cycle where I was never able to really build enough momentum to turn this into a company. I was just what a one-man band, so they say, as many of us can probably relate to. Chucking a truck, that was me. I had a garage absolutely full of tools, and anytime I need a new tool, it's like I'd start a new job and I'd take some of that cash and go buy the tools I needed, right? And just try to build the business. And I got to a point where I was just working all day, every day, nowhere near enough effort and energy being put towards the books, the back office. I didn't have a CRM system. I'm doing everything based off of handwritten agreements and some spreadsheets. I had learned how to do an Excel spreadsheet in college. So I'm like, cool, I'll do everything on Excel and trying to write checks through QuickBooks and manage and sync up the accounts. And I got to a point where, I had business and the cash flow wasn't there what I thought. And so I was like, well, I believe in myself, so we're going to start, leveraging. I had good credit, so we'll build up. We're going to use a credit card for these materials in this project. And once it's all done, I'll pay the credit card off once I get my job completed. Problem was, job completed, and there wasn't enough profit to pay off all the bills. I had rent, I had my mortgage, I had to eat, I had to live, and plus I thought I was a hot shot, right? I was a business owner. I had money. I went out and bought a boat, went out and bought, I had an extra truck at the time, a really nice truck. And I thought I was a hot shot, man. I'm a business owner. I got cash in the bank, but I wasn't paying attention. And shortly thereafter, I got pretty far over, got over my ski tips, as they say, and went broke, and at some point there was not enough money in the account to pay for all the invoices and the jobs I was doing. And I wasn't getting enough deposits and I wasn't closing jobs fast enough. And I got to a point where I'm leveraging as much credit as possible, maxed out on my credit cards. And I found myself in a really bad spot. And I was just trying to work through, learn, work through it. Lo and behold, this is right about when the economy started tanking. The bubble burst and the mortgage crisis hit, and the financial institution, there was a local bank that was right by that was financing a lot of these homeowners that was doing their basement finishes. That bank completely went under. At one point throughout this whole process, I was trying to do basements and do projects in the market that had the highest foreclosure rate in the entire country. And didn't realize it, because remember what I said earlier about paying attention to the market? When I started, the market was hot. The market was right. People were wanting to do that. But by the time it all came crashing down, I wasn't paying attention to the market. I was so in the weeds. I was so busy in my business trying to survive that I wasn't looking at it from a 30,000 foot view. I wasn't looking at it from on the business perspective. I was in the business, working in the business, and didn't pay attention to the market. Market started shifting, market started changing, and all of a sudden the bottom dropped out. Nobody was buying roofs or buying basement finishes anymore. And by the time I finished up my projects, I was left with a lot of debt and very little cash, and didn't know what to do. I was beside myself. I had no clue what to do. I was in a really tough spot. I started going to depression, drinking a lot, doing some drugs, like doing things. I just fell into a really bad place personally. And I share that because it's so easy. We're always on this slippery slope. When you become an entrepreneur, you're betting on yourself. You're putting your whole life out there trying to make something happen. And when things don't happen, it can affect you in a multitude of ways. And whether you're an entrepreneur or you work for a company, regardless of your situation, if you're not healthy personally, if you're not healthy mentally and emotionally and spiritually, it's going to affect your business. And for me, it just snowballed. I was not in a good spiritual place. I was not in a good place mentally, healthily. I was in a bad relationship at the time, and just everything was just compiling. And ultimately it all came kind of crashing down. And one of the worst days of my life was when I realized that I didn't have much else but to file bankruptcy. And ultimately that's what happened. I filed bankruptcy. It took a little while to process that. And that was basically me. You can look at that from a couple perspectives. Was I giving up? Was I a failure? That was all the things that went through my mind. I thought I was a failure. I'm like, man, I completely failed. I'm not good at this. I can't do this. There's so many self-limiting beliefs and self-doubt that comes into your mind. And I was in a dark place and depressed. And I had taken a job as a project manager again for a fire and water restoration company. And that's what ultimately kind of, it's like the reality of life is one thing leads to another. You never know what's ahead, right? We never know what's ahead. And I just did what I had to do. And luckily through my relationships and network, I was able to land a job as a superintendent managing projects for a fire and water restoration company. So they'd go in and, do the mitigation, and I'd go in and do all the rebuild and fix everything. And they piled a crap load of jobs on my plate, and I learned that, and I just dove in and I was doing it. I mean, not making enough money to really survive, but to thrive or really pay off my debt, but just enough to make minimums and pay my mortgage and survive. Right. And, but the silver lining through that's what got me exposed to the roofing industry in a roundabout way. Cause I first got exposed to disaster relief and fire and water restoration, and a tornado hit in my backyard, like a about 30 miles away in this little small town close to where we were working. And that's what it ultimately exposed me to the roofing industry. That's how I figured out what roofing was all about. And this big tornado hit, big hailstorm hit, and all these roofers came in and started, selling roofs and knocking doors. And here I am out there banging, hammers and boarding up windows and trying to land and do what I can as an employee for a restoration contractor. I connected with this guy that was like, yeah, man, I got a whole team of sales guys and we're here and we'll sell, a couple hundred roofs and we'll be out in a few months and we'll make blah, 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 all this money. And man, I was like, whoa, that was my first inkling of what roofing was, but I was still in a tough spot. So ultimately what happened was, and I'll kind of fast forward here for a little bit because we want to get to the story of how I got my roofing company started. But I say all this because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned throughout this journey. And I looking back, if I didn't go through all that, I don't think I would have been able to be as successful as I was when I got my roofing company started. So, and we're gonna press into that a little bit more as I continue on with the story.
JobNimbus is a fully customizable back office solution.
Track leads, jobs, tasks from one easy-to-use software.
And with the largest ecosystem of integrated partners, if we don't do it, we have a friend who does.
Learn how the #1 back office system in roofing
can help you be efficient, be organized, be professional, and be profitable.
Is your lead flow down? Whether you're a company owner, office staff, salesperson, or installer, you're a roofing rock star. We help you get more leads with custom SEO, Google Ads, and a pro website.
C3 Group's learning management system allows users access to digital training content, virtual trainings, and integrated chapter exams, all with the goal of helping a student prepare for user certification exams, as well as prepare them for real-world situations we know are faced daily. As a leader in this marketplace, we will continue to add value wherever possible to better our industry as a whole. Join us today and be part of that change.
Are you looking to stand out with your proposal? Sumo Quote is the contractor quote that crushes the competition. It is the fastest way to build custom quotes that impresses clients and wins more work. It's one of those must-have technologies for roofing contractors, allowing them to sell faster, sell more, and sell smarter. Be sure to check them out at try.sumoquote.com/start-build-grow.
So fast forward, I end up getting an idea that, hey, you know what? I know I needed to make money. I was in a deep hole financially and working for, a small salary, trying to manage all these projects wasn't going to work. And through all that, though, is what I got exposed to the good old days and the lifestyle of being an independent adjuster. And I became so therefore, the guys that I was working with at the restoration company, they were ex-adjusters and they were telling me about all this and networking again. I just asked them, hey, can you connect me with, your old boss or the company you used to work with? Because I think I want to become an insurance adjuster because, they were talking, you can travel around the country, work hurricanes and tornadoes and whatever, and you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And I was like, you know what? I don't know anything else. It's all I know is construction. I can probably do that. And I think it was a fast track to make the money I needed to get myself out of debt. Right. So I decided that I'm going to detour. I'm going to put my dreams of being a home builder on hiatus for a little bit. And I'm going to go become an insurance adjuster. I'm going to use that money to get myself out of this. And this was all like before I ended up filing bankruptcy. Right. So I'm kind of overlapping the story a little bit. So this was my effort in an attempt to not file. Right. Still in a bunch of debt, trying to figure it out. And I got connected with this company that was an independent adjuster firm, and they basically gave me the rundown. I mean, they weren't just going to hire me on the spot at that point. I needed training and licensing and stuff like that. So through all that, I learned that if I were to get a license in the state of Texas, that it would be reciprocal in 32 states. So I'm like, there we go. If I go there, I can do that. And it just so happened that I was dating the girl at the time that had moved to Austin, Texas. So here I was. I didn't have many other options. So I owned the home, but I just decided to put it on the market to rent. So I rented my house out. I condensed everything. I sold all my tools to try to get enough cash to move to Texas, sold all my tools, and literally condensed my entire life into my truck. Strapped the bed onto the back of my truck, and underneath the bed was everything I owned at the time in life, and filled that truck up and moved to Texas. And luckily I had a girlfriend out there already who had just moved there. So I was able to stay with her and just moved in. And that's how I started that part of the journey. And while I was in Texas, I worked hard. I got my license and ultimately got a few assignments to become an insurance adjuster. So I spent about a year of my life getting my license and traveling and doing some work as an insurance adjuster. And that's what really, really, really helped me understand roofing at a deeper level. So I'm out there as an insurance adjuster, and I see these roofers show up in these big trucks and talking about roofing and selling roofs and what they're doing. And I'm like, man, something's missing, because as an adjuster, one, I'm traveling, two, I'm working 12-hour days, three, 6, 7 days a week. And I was away from home, and it just wasn't settling well. I just knew there's something missing in life. It wasn't my end game. I always still wanted to be an entrepreneur. So there was just something missing. So one day, I decided, after, being out as an adjuster on an assignment for a while, I decided, I'm going to go back to Austin for a little bit and kind of regroup and figure out what my next move is going to be. And on my way into Austin, I decided, you know what, let me just see what this roofing thing's all about. So I called the first truck I saw, that had a wrap on it with the phone number. I called that phone number, and lo and behold, I could fog a mirror, and I was a human being that bled red and that can stand upright. So therefore I got a job. They hired me as a roofing salesman, no training whatsoever. They handed me a binder with some BS materials to help sell the company. And I knew Xactimate, I knew adjusting. So I was like, you know what? Sure, I'll figure this out. So I went out and somehow managed to sell a few roofs and figure it out. And that was as I was just getting exposed to the roofing industry. And through that, I had stayed in contact with some friends back home in Colorado, and they, one of my friends in particular had kind of stumbled into an opportunity where he was working for a roofing company as a canvasser and back in Colorado, and he found out that I was doing roofing, and he was like, "Hey man, a big storm just happened back in Denver. Come on, I can get you a job, and you can learn how to sell roofs here." And I didn't really think too much. I was at a point in life where I was depressed, I was broke, overwhelmed in debt, and I didn't know what else to do. So here I go again. I condensed everything back in the back of my truck. I strapped my bed right to the back of it again. And I went back home, went to Colorado, and I had no home. I was homeless. I had no plan. I had some friends there. So I was like, hey, I'll just couch surf for a little while. And that's what I did. I got a little place to store some of my stuff, and then searched, did some couch surfing for a little while, and went and sold roofs. So I got a job again, same type of scenario. I talked to the owner, and he was like, "Can you fog a mirror? Okay, yeah. You're a human being. Cool. You have a pulse. Cool. You're willing to go sell roofs. Cool. You have a job." That was my interview. That was as far as it took me. And lo and behold, that's what I did. I took my job. I'm like, sure, I'll go sell roofs. Let's figure this thing out. And put on their shirt, got some contracts, and met with a couple of vendors to try to learn a little bit more about roofing, because I didn't even know what different shingles were. I didn't know what dimensional shingles were or nothing. I know what the different brands. I knew nothing. So I just went and met and figured it out. And one of the first things I did, though, here's something that's important. Get to this company. It was a large company. They were hiring as many people as they could possibly hire at this time. And I was just a number. I was just another guy showed up to sell roofs. And one of the first things I did, though, I asked, who's the best sales rep? They had 50 of them at the time. He's pointed out this one gentleman. And to this day, we're still friends. And that's what I did. I was like, okay, I reached out to him. I didn't wait for him to call me. I reached out to him. This is a sales rep. He's really busy. He's hustling. I reached out to him. I was like, hey man, can I tag along with you? Can I meet with you? I want to pick your brain and learn how to sell roofs. And he said, sure, man, come on. So I tagged along with him and had as many conversations as I could. And then started connecting with some of the other top producers and figuring out what they did and how they interacted and what their day-to-day activity was, to then learn as much as I could. And lo and behold, I went out and I brought on my brother at the time. I was like, hey man, come with me. We'll go knock doors together. And if you can kind of help, we'll go knock doors. And then once we get an opportunity, I'll go in and sell it. And you go knock some more and get me more opportunities. And that's how we started. I just knocked doors and sold roofs, and I was able to sell a good amount of roofs in a short period of time, and made enough money to completely change my life. Roofing sales was a life-changing opportunity for me. And that's why, I'm very passionate about it. Now I teach people roofing sales. I teach people how to build systems. I wasn't trained. I just showed up and by the grace of God, I was able to connect with people and sell some roofs and make enough money to start my process of getting out of debt. But at the same time, I realized that me selling roofs now, I'm not going to get paid for a long time. It's going to be months and months before I actually see the fruits and see the finances of that. So I did the math and I was like, man, if I work all year long and make a huge amount of money, I might get out of debt, or might somewhat get out of debt. And that was a lot of challenging, a lot of difficult time, and thinking and processing. And that's when I filed and ended up going through with the bankruptcy, because it was like a reset button. I knew I had this new trajectory, and I knew this roofing thing, and I had learned so much in my past experience that I could do this roofing thing. So got into roofing sales, did really well, became one of the top sales reps at that company. I think I sold like 1.3 million in the first 7 months of being there. And this is the time when the average roof was 10, 12 grand, right? So it was hustle. We hustled, made it, did as much as we could. And I had kind of created a little sales company where I had my own canvassers. I had an assistant. I had a buddy of mine that we had partnered together, and we were, helping close deals together. And we kind of built our own little system to sell. And we did pretty well for the first little bit. But again, that entrepreneurial bug was always there. See, there was always something underlying that told me that you need to be an entrepreneur. You need to be your own boss, start a business. I knew that since I was a kid. I had this bug, and I stop and talk about that, and I press into that because a lot of you are listening. You can relate to that. Some of you maybe are just getting started. Maybe you've been started for a while, and you're trying to, work out some challenges and work through your business to try to, take that business to the next level. Maybe you're trying to get out of the business, or maybe you're trying to get out from working in the business and start working on the business, or you're doing those sort of things. But what that is, that bug, that little voice that's like, man, I'm not going to be satisfied until I put my chips on the table and I bet on myself and I go become an entrepreneur. I had that bug my whole life. And one day, after traveling, so I did really well in sales, and I started traveling and storm chasing. This was a company that was expanding all over the country, and I started going to different places in the country. And here I was again traveling, and just one day I just decided that I'm in another state again, away from home, and I look at the news and I hear about this baseball-sized hail that hit my hometown back in Colorado, or close to my hometown. It was in Aurora, Colorado, and I was like, I got to go back to Colorado. And I had met some great, again, networking. I keep circling back to this because so much of my journey and so much of what has happened is because I've just connected with people the whole time, the entire journey. I'm always connecting with people. You never know what's going to happen when you meet somebody and you make a connection and you're genuine and you build relationships, right? So that's such an important lesson in this whole journey that we're going through. And I'd connected with a gentleman who'd been in the business a while. He was a sales manager and traveling around and did sales and had made good money selling roofs and traveling. And he and I just one night, just after a few beers and whatnot, I was like, hey man, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to start my own roofing company. And somewhat facetiously, I was like, man, I'm going to need some cash. I don't have any money. How do I do this? And he was like, you know what? Tell you what, because we kind of put it on paper. Like I kind of wrote down, and there was no rhyme or reason to this, but I just kind of analyzed like what I thought it would take to get a roofing company started. And I figured that I could get away with about, maybe 40 or 50,000 bucks. If I can get that much money at one lump sum, I think I could leverage that to then build a roofing company and grow this thing pretty quickly. And what he told me, he said, hey, and the number I landed on was 40 grand. And he said, hey, if you can figure out a way to come up with another $25,000, I'll give you 15 grand, and it was like a hard money thing where I'd pay him some interest and whatnot. And I think he looking back, I'm sure he said it in a way of, yeah, right, this guy's not going to actually make this happen. No way he's going to come up with 25 grand. He's broke, doesn't got a pot to piss it. And I was like, challenge accepted. I'll do what I can. And literally that next day, packed up, jumped in my truck, drove 15 hours. And during those 15 hours, and that night, actually, I digress, that night on a hotel notebook, I still have it somewhere on the hotel, the notepad you get in the hotel room. I stayed up all night long and I wrote out my business plan. I wrote out, basically it was a checklist of all the things I needed to do. License, vendors, shirts, business cards, like I tried to think of everything I could possibly do, find a location. I thought of everything I could to try to do this, to start my business. And that was my business plan, right? Stayed up all night. The next day, drove for 15 hours. I remember pulling over in the rest area and sleeping in my truck that night and driving back home. And that was it. That was me. I'm going to get this business started. So I get home, I make some calls. I just assumed that I was going to find the money somehow, some way. And again, at this point in time, my relationship with Christ wasn't nearly where it should. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor and grew up, with a lot of, good principles around the Bible and those sort of things. But I had really deviated away from that during college and just partying and going through all the challenges I went through. That wasn't a priority in my life, but somehow, some way, God was looking out for me. And again, through my connections back when I was at home doing the construction thing, I had some friends that I knew were pretty well off. They owned companies and I had built relationships with them. And lo and behold, this one gentleman, again, I'm still friends with to this day, and we check in every once in a while. I reached out to him. I was like, hey man, because he had reached out to me previously, like asking just questions about roofing and roofing sales. And because he had another drywall company, two different people, but had a drywall company and they were doing really well, man. He was killing it. And I knew he was doing well financially. And he had asked me about, I'm going to start a roofing branch. And this was before I left. And then when I came back, I just reached out to him. I was like, hey man, I got this idea. I want to run it by you. And again, went up to his house. And he had a home office there. I went in the basement and I sat there. And after kind of preparing as best I could on typing up this proposal, I basically sat there for 2 hours and pitched him on the idea of, hey, I'm starting a roofing company and I need some cash. I need some investors. I need someone to kind of believe in me and help me out with this. And somehow, some way, by the grace of God, he agreed to write me a check for $25,000. So he wrote me a check for $25,000. In addition to that, because he was buying drywall from a vendor, a supplier that also sold roofing. So he was able to add a sub account and get my name added because I had no credit. Keep in mind, guys, I just filed bankruptcy. I could not go to a supplier and get credit. There's no way that was going to happen. So he was able, through my agreement with him, he was able to help me get a credit line, a smaller credit line for 40 grand, $40,000 credit line and $25,000 cash. I left out of there with a handwritten agreement. We put in place, and left out of there. I was on my way. So very next move I did, I called my buddy who was, I don't know where he was at the time. He had just gotten back to Colorado too, I think. And I was like, hey man, I got it. I did it. He's like, no way, man. No way. He's like, tell you what, come by tomorrow. I got you a check for 15 grand. So I went by again, wrote him up a proposal as well. And looking back, man, I paid a lot of money for that money, but it would have never happened, right? So again, tenacity. I knew I was on a mission. I knew I wanted to make this happen. And by faith and by the connections and the network that I had built, I was able to generate 40 grand cash while being bankrupt and another 40 grand in a credit line. And that was the tipping point. That was what it took for me to get my roofing company started. Now, everybody has a different story. There's 100,000 roofing companies out there and thousands get started every year, right? Everyone has a different story. And I wanted to kind of take a moment to share my story from my perspective, but there's so many takeaways. There's a lot of takeaways here. And as I kind of press into getting started, so to finish out that piece of it, I got the cash, went and opened my bank account. I already had my license. Remember, I was already a contractor. So I was able to, and I had a company that was already registered with the state for 3 years. So I was able to get some BBB credentials, and I was able to, get a few credentials right away to kind of get connected with a manufacturer, become a manufacturer partner, like an OC, preferred or something like that. I was able to get early on and get my BBB accreditation right away. And, and at the time, when I mentioned I was doing roofing sales before, I had hired an assistant, and that assistant happened to be my mom. She was out of work. She'd just been laid off from a job she was at for, I think, 18 years. And I knew she was really good with money. She was good with logistics and really good with details and paperwork and doing all the things that I really sucked at. So I somehow convinced her to come work with me. And that was another amazing thing. And she said, essentially I said, I painted the vision. Like, hey, I got this money. We're starting a roofing company. And this is the plan. I laid out the whole plan for her. And somehow she was able to say, you know what, let's go ahead. I'll give this a go and I'll help you. And I didn't know if I even had a way to pay it, right? I had a little bit of cash, but I knew I was going to need it. So right off the bat though, and the reason why I share this story, she was, that was my story. And it was a blessing to have her on my side to help with me. But what I learned the first go around when I tried to do everything myself was that I wasn't capable of doing everything myself. And I think so many contractors, as I mentioned, I'm a business coach. Now I've coached hundreds, I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands of contractors over the last few years with our coaching company, the Roofing Academy. You can check us out at the Roofing Academy at roofingacademy.com. And you can book a call. I'd love to chat with you more. If you're just getting started, I'd love to chat with you about your startup journey. And we have incredible programming. I have an online course that has over 200 hours of content in it to help you get your roofing company started. Every document, every spreadsheet, every standard procedure, all the things that you can possibly need to get your roofing company started, that's all included. Plus, you can get some calls with myself and be plugged into our community of contractors all across the country that support one another in starting, building, and growing roofing companies. So I encourage you to kind of reach out and connect with me. And let's get a call. Let's get on a call. You can hit me up on social media or go to theroofingacademy.com and we can connect there. So, but what I learned was I needed some sort of admin or somebody that was really good in the areas that I was not. I knew I struggled with keeping up with the books, with managing budgets, with job costing, with invoicing and those sort of things. I knew I struggled with all that. So that was the idea, is like my second go around when I started my roofing company, I wasn't going to make that mistake again. And I knew it was going to cost money. I knew it was going to be a risk, but I knew if I'm going to make this thing happen, I need to focus on growing the business, hiring salespeople, selling roofs, growing this business. And I wasn't good on the back end, on the back office stuff. So day one, I hired somebody to help me with that. And that happened to be my mother. It doesn't have to be your mom. Doesn't have to be a family. We'll talk more about that as we go through this five series journey here about working with family. But I was blessed because she jumped in and she did a great job, and she was all in with me, and we worked hard, and we had many challenging days and nights, and many times I didn't get paid. Many times, Thursday afternoon, we're like just praying that we're going to have enough cash come in Friday morning in order to pay our bills. And lo and behold, we were able to make it work. It was not easy, but we made it work. But having that extra person, that admin, that if you look at it, that integrator, that person that was able to execute and build processes from day one was such a huge catalyst in us being able to be successful in building a great roofing company. So as I kind of land the plane on this first program here, getting started. So we got the business started, and I remember that very first roof, again, I think I had called somebody, my brother or a friend of mine, and I was like, hey man, come sell roofs with me. And again, through my network, I had connected with people that I knew in the industry. Here's something very important. When I got back, I went into the company that I was working for. I met with that owner, and I told him, I said, I am going to regret not doing this for the rest of my life if I don't go out and try to start my own roofing company. And I told him, I was straight up with him. I was honest with him. I didn't do anything behind his back. I wasn't trying to start this company and work for there at the same time. I was straightforward up front. And I told him, if I can have your blessing to go start this other company, I won't take your salespeople. I won't take anything from your company. I'll do everything I can to finish out the deals I have with you, keep it on the up and up, close those deals out, because I'm going to need that money to be able to plug into my other business. And I was honest about it, and I was straightforward, and I executed. Okay. Everything on the up and up. And again, as I've mentioned this a few times, we're still friends. We're still close. I could still call him anytime. We connect with one another, and we see each other on different events, and we always connect and reminisce, and it's a good situation. But no bad blood there, because I did it the right way. Too many times in this business, people do these things the wrong way. They're acting behind someone's back, or they're being malicious, or they're being like secretive about what they're doing. Just be straightforward and honest, man. Always, always, always be straightforward and honest, and do what you say you're going to do. And I did that. I did what I said I was going to do. And I finished out the jobs I had, kept a great relationship with all those customers. I never once took anybody from his organization. I didn't call any salespeople. I didn't do anything, except for the one guy that I already planned on. The guy that brought me in, he came with me. And that was okay, right? I talked about that and asked permission, and we did that. But never once did I go and try to hurt his company or take any crews or anything. I just started fresh and did my own thing. And I think that was really important. So I pressed into that a little bit. So we got the business started and just went out and knocked doors. And I think my very first roof was in Lakewood, Colorado. I remember I still have a picture to this day of me planting a sign. My branding was terrible. I created my first little logo online. I just found some logo creator online. And to this day, a revised version of that is still our logo, which is really cool. But I had to make it work. I had to do everything I could to make it work on a shoestring budget. And I think one of the things that comes up a lot with people is, when I get started, who do I hire first? What do I do? So what I did, I had my admin as my first employee. And then I think my brother was my first canvasser, and I had my other buddy who I was working with. So he came on as my first sales rep, and we were able to bring a couple of his friends on as canvassers and sales reps. That's how we started, right? It just through my network, I'm just pitching and selling people on this dream. I'm building a roofing company. We're going to do great things. And I just charisma, and I'm just doing everything I can to try to sell the dream of come to work for me. And I was able to connect with people in the industry and convince a few guys to come sell. So within that first year, I think we had 3 to 5 sales reps come in and out. And it was great. We were able to kind of make some things happen and get off the ground. And we didn't do nearly as much as we had hoped, but we started right off the bat, adding a couple sales reps. But here's a couple of key takeaways. One of the first things I did was I realized, I'm looking at the industry and thinking, how do I differentiate myself? What's everybody doing? What are people not doing? Very few companies were doing any sort of repairs. And I saw that right off the bat. I realized that, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to hire a repair guy. So I was able to, through my network, I was able to find a repair tech. I bought a crappy truck. I financed $9,000 for this hail damaged piece of crap truck. And I put him in a truck and we were able to do repairs. So he did repairs, quality control and site supervision. And I was able to pay for him right off the bat. I figured out that all I needed to do was I think 2 or 3 repairs a week to pay for that salary and all the costs I had associated. So I went in and I did that right away. So one of my first hires, I brought on an admin, then I brought on a repair tech. And then very soon after that, or maybe even at the same time, I had reached out to one of my best friends. We grew up together, right? A best friend that we've always stayed in touch and went to college together. We're roommates in college, best friends through high school and junior high, and just were close. And I just knew his personality. We're different, but I knew he'd be a really good sales rep. And again, I just somehow, some way, I was like, there's some connection here. So it just so happened that life circumstances were in a good place where I invited him to come back out to Colorado, to Denver. And it's like, hey man, I'm going to teach you roofing sales. Let's see if you can do well with that. Shortly after that, I quickly realized that, if I'm really going to take this thing to another level, that he brought a different perspective to things that was super valuable. And I realized that, again, I'm not gonna be able to do everything, but I'm good at a certain number of things, but there's other things I'm not great at. And he happened to be really good at some of the things that I wasn't good at. And we were different. We weren't the same person, right? What you don't want in a partnership is the same person, right? The same type of people. Partnerships don't work that way. They never last. You can't have 2 chiefs, right? Too many chiefs in the kitchen, or whatever they say. Chefs in the kitchen, however they say it. But he was different in a way. Great leader, was great at sales, and I brought him on early on, like within a few months and I was like, hey man, if we're gonna make this thing big, come be my partner. So brought on a partner, and off and running we went. We both started recruiting sales reps and started making things happen. And that was ultimately how we got the business started. That was the first couple months. That all happened probably within the first 3 months of starting. We started in the middle of the year. I think it was May. And we ended at just over 500,000 in sales that first year. So first 6 months. So if we had a full year, we would have been at $1 million our first year. And at that point in time, it was a good start. And we kind of started the process of creating some systems, and we were learning as we went. And one last thing that happened towards the end of that is we started getting busy enough to where, my mom, who was doing all the office work, the office manager, she was like, hey, if we're going to grow this thing, we're going to need another person. And so I'm like, okay, what can I do? And it just so happened that my sister, and you're going to learn a lot more about that later on in one of the next episodes, but we brought my sister on as basically just my mom's assistant. Her job originally was to file papers and just be an assistant. And she was actually just out of rehab. She had just gotten out of rehab for the third time and virtually unemployable. And we gave her a chance. Obviously I knew my sis. I knew she was really bright and sharp and driven and wanted to make things happen in life. And, we decided to give her a shot. And as we kind of give you a little teaser into the next handful of episodes, she's played an absolutely integral role in the build out of our multi-million dollar roofing company. So I really encourage you to join me in the next episode where we're going to talk about the first $1 million. We're going to talk about some takeaways and some things that we did to get to that first $1 million and what we're able to do to execute that, what systems we put in place, and what some lessons that we learned as well along the way. So thank you so much for joining me. If you're out there just getting started, or you plan on starting, or maybe you started 5 years ago and you're able to get some takeaways from this, I'd love to chat with you. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. Please subscribe to the channel, subscribe, to our social media platforms, subscribe to the podcast, to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to the podcast, go to YouTube, subscribe to YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast channel, man. We want to connect with you and want to share more of our journey together. And if you want to chat with me more about your startup journey, and you want to ask questions or kind of get more insight as to checking out what we do at the Roofing Academy with our consulting platform and all of our online courses, as well as all the documents that we have available, reach out at theroofingacademy.com. You right at the top, you can book a call, and that is a call you will book directly with me. I'd love to connect with you and chat with you. Thank you so much for listening to this first episode of this journey, and appreciate you and look forward to the comments and connecting with you. Take care. God bless.